The fiancé who swore to love her chose her own sister. As if the humiliation wasn't enough, her father decided for her. An arranged marriage to a cruel man, a fate sealed without a choice. But she wasn't born to obey. If she couldn't escape, then she would play the game, in the most dangerous way possible. Instead of accepting the arranged marriage, she did something no one would dare to do. She stopped in front of a beggar and asked him to marry her. The plan was simple: turn him into a powerful man, without anyone discovering the truth. What she didn't know was that the beggar was already the most powerful man of all. He was the Alpha King, and he had no intention of telling her. The first punch landed before she had even fully stopped at the entrance, followed by the roar of the crowd, making the air inside the warehouse vibrate. Leonora didn't hesitate. She stepped in. The smell came right after. Blood, sweat, cheap alcohol, and money changing hands far too quickly. That kind of place only existed there, in the neutral lands, where no human king and no shifter or alpha king held power long enough to impose order. And that was exactly why she was there. The hood of her cloak covered part of her face, hiding more than it should. The simple clothes, borrowed, didn't suit her. Not the way she walked, not the way she looked at things. But that night, they would have to be enough. She hadn't come to watch. She had come to find a way out. Inside the warehouse, men of all kinds crowded around an open space in the center, shouting names, raising fists, tossing coins. Leonora moved closer to the circle, and then she saw him. At the center of it all, a man. Tall. Broad shoulders in a way that felt almost disproportionate. Torn clothes, stained with blood already darkened, the fabric clinging to his body from the sweat of the fight. His hair was tied back, a few loose strands stuck to his forehead, and his face was a study in controlled brutality, jaw tight, eyes lowered, cold, focused on the opponent in front of him with a presence Leonora hadn't expected to find in a place like that. The opponent was bigger, heavier. The crowd shouted his name. The man with tied hair said nothing. He simply waited. And when the opponent charged forward with his full weight, he didn't step back. He turned, absorbed the blow with his shoulder, and used the man's own momentum against him with a precision that felt practiced for years. The opponent stumbled. The man followed without hesitation. 2 quick strikes. And when the opponent dropped to his knees, spitting blood and at least 2 teeth onto the dirt floor, it was silence that came first. Then the cheers. Leonora didn't cheer. She just watched. "Who is he?"
How much longer do you
she asked the woman beside her, an older lady who watched the fight as if it were just another afternoon at the market. The woman wrinkled her nose. "A beggar. Drinks his way through the streets, fights for coins to buy more alcohol." She shook her head. "You seem like a good girl, my dear. You deserve better." Leonora's eyes never left the man at the center of the warehouse. A beggar, she thought. Perfect. He was standing outside, holding the coins he had earned that night in his hand. She stopped in front of him. He didn't look up right away. But when his eyes reached her face, they stayed there. Dark, wavy hair. Green eyes that held attention. They simply took over. Valen had looked at many women in his life. Court women, market women, women who knew exactly the effect they had and used it as currency. But this one wasn't using anything. She simply was. Leonora had inherited her mother's beauty. And Valen knew very well who he was, knew the weight of the name he carried. But that woman persuaded him with nothing more than a look, and he became certain that no matter what she asked, he would be unable to refuse. "Want to earn a lot of coins?" she asked, breaking the silence. "What do you want me to do?" His voice was deeper than she expected. "Marry me." He stared at her, intrigued by the proposal. He glanced at her simple clothes. "How are you going to pay?" he said more than asked, "when you look just as poor as I am?" She smiled. "Trust me." He held her smile in his gaze for 2 seconds that felt heavier than they should have. "Is this desperation to get married?" "It's the opposite." She held out her hand. "I'm buying my freedom." He looked at the outstretched hand, the hand of a woman who clearly didn't spend her days working the land. "Interesting." "Leonora," she said when he took her hand. The pressure of his fingers around hers was firm. "My name is Valen." She was already turning to leave. "You need to come with me to my estate, and no one can know you're there. You'll stay hidden." He watched her for 1 more second after she turned her back, then followed. The estate was large. They entered through the back, through well-kept gardens and stone structures that had cost real money to build. The windows were tall. A wealthy family here in these lands. Interesting. What kind of business does her family have? He thought. And where does she plan to hide me? She walked straight into a bedroom, and this time he noticed. It was her room, but it didn't look like it. No crowded mirrors, no lined-up perfumes, no delicate fabrics scattered around like someone who spent too much time choosing what to wear. Instead, there was a table covered in open books, some stacked carelessly, others marked in haste. Valen paused behind her for a second, his eyes moving around the room more carefully now. She intends to keep me in her room? The thought came before he could stop it. I like that. Leonora was already calling. Marta. The woman appeared quickly. I want hot water now, and clothes. Her eyes passed over him. Once, direct. No embarrassment, no rush. Shirt, pants, boots. As if she already knew, as if she had already decided. Marta nodded, but before leaving, and this stays between us. The door closed. Silence. Valen remained still, looking around once more. Her room. A corner of his mouth lifted, almost imperceptibly. If only she knew who I am. She turned to him. The bath will be ready soon, as if nothing there was unusual. When you're done, there will be clothes and food. He tilted his head slightly, watching her more closely now. And if I say I don't need a bath? Her eyes dropped. No hesitation. No delicacy. They returned to his face. Then you haven't looked at yourself properly. His faint smile didn't fade. Leonora walked through the house corridors with steady steps, as if what she was about to say were the simplest thing in the world. Inside, she counted every breath. It was something she had learned before she even understood why she needed to. That the only thing a man like Joseph respected was the absence of hesitation. Any weakness was a door, and Joseph knew how to walk through doors better than anyone. She remembered her mother. How her mother also tried to keep her posture straight. How sometimes she couldn't. Don't think about that now. He was in the office, as always. Joseph was a man of undeniable physical presence, tall, his face marked not by age, but by the choices he had made without ever looking back. Leonora stopped at the doorway. Father, I'm not marrying Otto. He didn't even look up from his papers. The agreement is already made. I have another suitor. That made him look up. No, you don't, he said, his voice low, controlled, the way it was when he had decided not to argue. You're going to marry Otto because I gave my word, and my word doesn't break over a daughter's whim. Leonora felt the weight of that. He has enough money to cover the cost of breaking the agreement. Otto won't walk away without what he's owed. Money won't be the issue. Joseph remained still for a moment. She knew that silence. It wasn't consideration, it was calculation. Joseph never reacted immediately. He weighed things, always. That was how he had risen from nothing and built his own name in the neutral lands, a place that belonged to no kingdom, neither to men nor to alphas nor to any crown, a territory between three realms where everything blended together. Trade, taverns, fights, humans and shifters sharing the same ground. Many had tried to dominate those lands, kings, alphas, entire armies, but no one could hold control for long. Power there didn't stay in the hands of those who ruled, but of those who negotiated, and it was the merchants who truly stood out. While other men had made the wrong bets, Joseph hadn't, and now he was doing the same again. She saw it in the way he leaned back in his chair, in the way his gaze shifted from her to somewhere beyond, as if connecting pieces. And then came the thought of the other merchant, the only man who had been going head-to-head with him in that territory, stealing deals, arriving first, growing too fast, too quietly. No one knew where he had come from. No one knew his name. Only the gold. Joseph had tried more than once to find out and failed. Who was this merchant? Could it be him? There weren't that many wealthy men around here, Joseph wondered. And now his eyes returned to her, different, sharper, as if the missing piece had just fallen into place. "Invite this suitor to dinner," he said, slower now, as if weighing every word. "I want to see with my own eyes whether my daughter isn't simply inventing an escape to avoid her obligation." "Of course," she said. She returned to her own chambers, but when she went back and looked toward the bathing room, she found the door closed, not ajar, closed. And that made her stop. The silence on the other side weighed more than it should have. No sound of water, no movement, nothing. And the thought came too quickly to ignore. Had he left? Of course he could have. A man like him owed her nothing. He would take what he could and disappear. Leonora stepped forward and knocked her wrist against the wood. "Valen?" No answer came. Discomfort arrived first, concern right behind it, and before she could think better of it, she pushed the door harder than she intended. The wood gave way at once, and she stepped inside before she was ready for what she would find. Valen was in the bath. The water was covered by a thick layer of foam, enough to reveal nothing beyond what rose above the surface. Broad shoulders, neck. His face turned slightly to the side, eyes closed, the slow breathing of someone who had finally relaxed after far too long without being able to. Leonora stood still for a second that lasted longer than it should have. It wasn't what she saw that held her there. It was the contrast. That man she had found thrown on the ground outside a warehouse, covered in blood and dirt. And now the image of him there, quiet, with the afternoon light slipping through the window and settling over his face. His jaw loose, his brow unknotted. As if, inside that bath, he were a completely different person from everything he had shown until then. "Stop," she told herself. She lifted a hand to her face and took a step back. "I'm sorry," Leonora said quickly, already retreating a step. "I thought you had left. I don't want an agreement." She ignored it. "I'll have your clothes brought." "Will you?" he teased, a faint smile forming. "That's why I came." He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, slowly. "Funny," he said at last. "Because you're still here. Seems like you enjoy watching me bathe." Heat rose before she could stop it. She stopped. There was no good excuse. "I was just making sure you hadn't run away." One corner of his mouth shifted. Silence. She closed the door. On the other side, Leonora leaned her back against the wood, her face warm. Then she pushed herself away, promising herself there was nothing remarkable about what she had just seen. Nothing. When Valen came out, he was, in fact, put together. The clothes Marta had brought were too large. The sleeves fell over his wrists, the collar sat loose around his neck. But something about him made that irrelevant in a way Leonora couldn't immediately explain. It was his posture, the way he occupied space, as if the clothes were secondary, and what mattered was the presence inside them. His hair was loose now, clean, falling over his shoulders with a weight that completely changed the way his face was read. This man, clean, is dangerous, she thought, and immediately regretted thinking it. Sit, she said, taking the chair in front of the bed and folding her hands in her lap. Another order. Sit, please. He sat. She remained silent for a moment before beginning, as if choosing how far she could trust him. Here. The neutral lands aren't like the surrounding kingdoms. There's no single ruler, no closed borders, no one demands loyalty. A brief pause. That's why it grows. Trade never stops. There are always more people arriving, merchants, adventurers, families trying to start over. Her gaze drifted for a moment, then returned. And shifters, many of them, living side by side with humans. A slight shrug. It works. As long as money keeps moving and no one steps where they shouldn't. Silence. Here, you don't win through war, she continued more quietly. You win through agreements. She rested her fingers on the table, distracted, her mind clearly somewhere else. And that's what makes everything dangerous. Valen said nothing. She went on. Power here has no crown, but it has names. Joseph, she said first, without emotion. My father. He built everything over time. Routes, grain, caravans, people owing him favors. He always knew who to talk to, when to yield, and when to press until he got what he wanted. James? Her mouth tightened for a moment, as if swallowing something she didn't want to say. My former fiancé. Involved with metal and ironwork. And then, Otto. This time, the name carried weight. Horses, leather, land. The kind of man who believes everything can be bought with a signature. She let out a controlled breath through her nose. The man my father decided I will marry. The silence grew heavier. An agreement made without me even being heard. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then continued softer. But there's someone else. Now she looked straight at him. Someone who doesn't play like they do. A step. He doesn't appear. Doesn't sit at the table. Doesn't show his face. Her eyes didn't waver. He started small. Fabrics, tapestries, fine wool, rare dyes, orders that left here and crossed borders before anyone else noticed. Then came treated furs, finer pieces, better contracts, and he still manages to negotiate with the kingdoms. She continued. He arrives first, negotiates, and disappears before anyone can see him. My father has tried to find out who he is. More than once. He never could. Leonora held his gaze. And now he thinks that man might be you. A pause. But it's not. She tilted her head slightly. It's me. Valen's eyes never left her face as she spoke. He didn't believe what he was hearing, not because he doubted it, but because a thought had already begun forming. Valen wasn't there by chance. The neutral lands belonged to no one, and that was exactly why he wanted them. Human kings had tried. Alphas too. No one had succeeded. And everyone wanted those lands. Not just because of the trade that flourished there, but because they lay at the center of 3 kingdoms, an inevitable path for anyone coming to trade, pass through or settle. There was abundant water, rivers that didn't dry even in the harshest seasons, fertile land surrounding them, and routes that connected everything. Whoever established themselves there would end up holding more than just land. He had been coming for months, in, out, watching, learning who truly held power, and who only thought they did. The disguise helped. No one pays attention to a man who appears to have nothing. A beggar can pass anywhere unseen. But she was remarkable. He was standing in front of the person who truly ruled that place, and he didn't know whether to thank the moon goddess for it. I grew up watching my father work, she continued, her voice lowering slightly, not from emotion, but from the nature of what she was saying. I learned how trade works before I learned how to embroider. I started with tapestries, reinvested, kept everything separate, everything hidden, because if my father found out, he would take my business. She adjusted her hands in her lap. That's why I need to marry, so he no longer has power over what is mine. So I don't have to answer to him or to any man he chooses for me. Valen remained silent. Leonora didn't speak again for a moment. It was strange. She had said all of that out loud to a man she had found lying outside a warehouse less than 3 hours ago, and the confession felt lighter than she expected. She didn't know if that was good or concerning. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity. It wasn't exaggerated admiration. It was something closer to recognition, like someone seeing in another person a quality they had spent a lifetime searching for. How can a woman be like this? Valen thought. And it wasn't a light thought. It was the direct conclusion of someone who had evaluated people for years and was rarely surprised. Beautiful and intelligent, and neither in a loud way, but in the quiet way that was harder to ignore than anything else. And she hadn't asked anything about him. Not where he came from, not what he did beyond fighting, not whether he had family or enemies. She had simply decided he would do, and moved forward. It's her, he thought, with a certainty that shouldn't exist so soon. And yet it did. She's the one I want as my queen. I will do whatever you need, he said. But you need to know something first. My father doesn't accept words without proof. He demanded a dinner. He wants to see you with his own eyes before dissolving the agreement with Otto. Valen stayed quiet, waiting. And for that dinner to work, she continued, you need to understand who you will be. The fourth figure no one has ever been able to identify. The powerful merchant who makes deals in the shadows and never appears in public. Valen said nothing. He simply watched, his eyes following every small movement she made. Well. She stood and walked to the window, opening it and looking down. Now you'll have to leave without being seen. The carriage is waiting on another street. You'll have to jump. He looked at her. Jump. It's the only way to leave without anyone in the house seeing you. Leonora, there's a staircase right there, which 3 people use regularly, including my father. She pointed to the window with complete ease. It's the first floor. And what is a window to someone who fights men twice his size for copper coins? Valen looked at her for a second. This woman is completely insane, he thought. And what have I gotten myself into? But there was a smile threatening to form at the corner of his mouth as he swung one leg out the window. And of course, for him, jumping was easy. He was an alpha king. The carriage stopped in front of the estate late in the afternoon. Valen stepped down slowly, shoulders relaxed, his gaze moving across the front of the house with the calm interest of someone assessing, not admiring. Leonora stood at the entrance as he climbed the steps. She looked him over quickly from head to toe, with that inventory-like gaze he was already beginning to recognize. She said nothing, but something in her expression settled, a small tension easing from her shoulders, and he understood that he looked presentable enough for what was coming. My father will test you. Don't answer too quickly. A man with wealth doesn't need to justify himself. Valen looked at her for a second. Leonora. Yes? I've been in places far more difficult than a dining room. She opened her mouth, thought better of it, and turned to walk into the house without replying. He followed, the corner of his mouth perfectly still, but his eyes held something that only showed when she turned her back. The dining hall was exactly what he expected from a family that had built power in the neutral lands. Large enough to impress, restrained enough not to feel like display. The dark oak table, the tall candles in iron candelabras, the heavy chairs that scraped when pulled. Joseph stood when Valen entered, a gesture few men earned from him, and Valen noticed without showing it. "Valen," Leonora said, her voice steady, introducing, not seeking approval. "My father, Joseph." The two men looked at each other. "I've heard a great deal about you," Joseph said, his voice carrying the weight of someone testing the ground before stepping forward. "I doubt it," Valen said, settling into the chair with a calmness that didn't ask permission. "I do my best not to be discussed." A pause. Joseph sat slowly, his eyes still on the visitor's face, and something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. It wasn't approval yet. It was interest. And interest, Leonora knew, was the most valuable currency her father possessed. She let out the breath she had been holding since the entrance. James and Margot arrived together, as they always did. Him first, her a step behind. Margot was beautiful. Leonora had never denied that, not even to herself. She was younger, with light hair, and had learned early that beauty was a tool, not an ornament. When she entered the dining room and her eyes landed on Valen, Leonora saw the exact moment something shifted in her half-sister's gaze. The smile Margot gave was too warm to be genuine. "So this is the mysterious suitor," she said, settling into her chair with an elegance Leonora recognized as practiced. "Leonora never tells us anything. She keeps everything to herself." "A surprise," Leonora said, with just enough lightness to sound like provocation. Margot laughed. It was a pretty laugh that didn't reach her eyes. James, beside her, remained quiet. He was a man of slow assessments. He didn't ask questions before having at least one answer ready. Leonora knew that way better than she would have liked to admit. She had spent enough time beside him to learn every silence, every gesture, before Margot decided to claim for herself the man who had once been promised to her older half-sister. Dinner unfolded with the controlled tension of a stretched rope no one wanted to pull first. "Strange that we've never heard your name before." With so much business happening here, Margot made 2 or 3 remarks laced with poison. "That's strange that we've never heard your name before, with so much business happening here." And Valen answered with such genuine politeness that there was nothing to seize. James asked questions like a merchant. Valen answered like one, and Joseph observed everything. Leonora spoke little. She observed, like her father. And what she saw unsettled her in a way she couldn't name, because Valen wasn't just playing the role she had given him. He was being himself within that role, and those two things didn't fit for a man who, as far as she knew, was a beggar. "Who are you, Valen?" The thought came quietly, without warning, and she pushed it aside before it could take root. "It's getting late," Valen said, when the candles in the candelabras had burned halfway down. "I arrived later than I intended and couldn't find a room in any inn in the city." "Don't worry about that," Joseph said, with the calculated generosity of someone investing, not offering. "The estate has plenty of rooms. Stay here until you get yourself settled." Valen considered for a second, not long enough to seem hesitant, not short enough to seem eager. "I accept," he said at last. Leonora turned her head slightly toward him and gave a small smile. It had worked. She had already known her father would do that. The chambers Joseph assigned were generous. A wide bed, a window overlooking the garden, a low fireplace Marta had already lit before bringing up the clothes left over from the afternoon purchases. Valen stood in the middle of the room for a moment after the door closed. He looked around, surprised. Leonora had thought of everything. Again. Without him needing to ask, without her needing to explain. She had simply anticipated, arranged, and made it happen with the quiet efficiency of someone used to solving things alone, because it had always been that way. He walked to the window. The garden lay quiet below, night already settled over the trees, and beyond the estate wall the dark line of the forest began where the torchlight ended. He stood there for a moment, looking into that darkness, and then he closed his eyes. It wasn't a gesture of fatigue, it was focus. The thought moved as part of him, not in words, but in something deeper, more instinctive, crossing distance without needing a voice. He felt the pack before any answer came. He felt the beta, the solid, alert presence of the man he had left in the castle with clear instructions. He felt the others, scattered at a distance, each one a different flame in the same fire. "I'll be away for a while," he communicated through thought, simple and direct, as he always was with them. "The beta leads. If there's urgency, call. I'll return." The answer came within seconds. "Were you ambushed? Do you need help?" Valen opened his eyes. Down below, beyond the wall, in the shadows of the forest, he felt their presence. Quiet. Waiting. The pack that never stayed completely far, even when he asked for distance, not out of disobedience, but because of what they were, what he was to them. He gave a slow nod toward the darkness. "I'm fine." The shadows shifted, and the forest fell silent again. Valen exhaled slowly and stepped away from the window. He had found his queen, and the certainty of that only grew, silently and irrevocably. By morning, Leonora came down the stairs with her hair still half loose, her eyes still carrying the weight of too few hours of sleep. She always slept poorly when there was too much on her mind, and that night her mind had been too full. She thought about dinner, about her father's expression, about the way Valen had answered every question with calm. She thought more than she should have about that calm. She entered the breakfast room and stopped. Valen was at the table. Not just at the table. He was at the center of a conversation involving two servants, the cook who rarely left the kitchen before midday, and the old gardener who never spoke to anyone, all of them laughing. The gardener, whom Leonora had never heard laugh, was laughing. She stood in the doorway for a second, not understanding what she was seeing. Valen lifted his gaze and saw her. He stood, crossed the space between them, and when he reached her, he took her hand with a gentleness Leonora hadn't expected. From hands she had seen break the teeth of a man twice his size. He brought her hand to his lips. The kiss was light, brief, completely appropriate to the context of a suitor greeting his promised bride in front of others. But the warmth that rose up her arm was not appropriate to anything at all. He guided her to the table with a light touch at her back, a small gesture, almost impersonal. And Leonora felt that touch, as if the layer of fabric between his fingers and her skin didn't exist. "Close your mouth, Leonora." The whisper came from beside her, Margot, settling into her chair with a false smile. Leonora turned to the table as if she hadn't heard, but the heat in her face said otherwise. After breakfast, Joseph announced a walk. "So Valen can see the lands," he said, in that tone that wasn't an invitation, but had the shape of one. The family's lands stretched around them, tall grass swaying with the wind, lakes reflecting the sky, and farther out cultivated areas, rows of grain just beginning to grow, people working in the distance, quietly. Valen stopped beside her. Behind them, James and Margot approached. For a moment no one spoke, only the sound of the wind moving across the field. Leonora made a simple gesture with her chin. "This is where everything begins." Valen followed her gaze, unhurried. When the distant line of the kingdom of Emberfell came into view, it was James who broke the silence. "A partnership there would change everything," he said, looking in the same direction. The Alpha King opens doors no amount of money can buy. Impossible, Margot said before anyone else could answer. Everyone knows the Alpha King is a recluse, ruthless, they say. And besides being a king, he's a strong-blooded shifter, which makes him more powerful than any trade alliance would be worth risking. Leonora let out a quiet breath through her nose, her eyes still on the horizon. People love to invent greatness, she said. I bet he's just an ordinary man, ugly, ill-tempered, and hidden for a good reason. Silence. Valen tilted his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. A low sound escaped, a restrained laugh. That might be exactly right. Joseph entered the room without knocking. That was his way. The door opened as if the space on the other side belonged to him by right. And perhaps it did, because no one in the house had ever dared to say otherwise. Leonora was sitting near the window with an open book in her lap that she wasn't reading, and Valen occupied the chair in front of her, legs crossed, a glass of wine turning slowly between his fingers, both of them silent. The wedding is set, he announced, with the straightforward satisfaction of a man who had just closed a good deal. The agreement with Otto will be dissolved. Joseph looked at Valen, testing him. I hope I'm not being inconvenient. Not at all, Valen said. Joseph left with the same ease he had entered. The silence that remained was different from before. Leonora's fingers tightened around the cover of the book without her noticing. The leather gave under the pressure. Her gaze was no longer there. It had gone somewhere far away, caught in something she wasn't saying. Her jaw locked for a moment. Valen watched her movements. He knew very little about her, but losing control didn't suit her. She's holding it in, he thought. Leonora, he said. But she was already on her feet. She left in hurried steps. He followed her. The back garden was the quietest place on the estate at that hour. Leonora was sitting on a stone bench. She heard his steps approaching, and even so, she straightened before he could notice the fragility she was hiding. Valen sat beside her on the stone bench without asking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved the leaves above them, with a low, constant sound. The kind of silence inhabited by two people still learning the weight of each other. Sometimes I get scared, Leonora said. I know my father is like this. I've known for a long time. But there are days when it still catches me off guard. She paused. I met you only a few days ago, and he's already handing me over as if I were a bargaining chip. No ceremony. Not even... She stopped. Not because she had run out of words. She had plenty. But the ones that came next belonged to a memory that hurt to speak. Her mother never shouted. That was what Leonora remembered most clearly. The way her mother would sit by the bedroom window, hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed somewhere that wasn't the garden below. The way she smiled when Joseph entered the room. A smile that came too quickly and disappeared just as fast. Leonora had been 8 years old when she understood her father had another woman. When she realized her mother knew everything and cried alone, always alone. Leonora had stored that away in the deep place where the things that shape a person are kept without them realizing it. The quiet certainty that she would not be like that. That she would not sit by a window waiting for a man who treated her like a piece on a board. That no agreement, no alliance, no family name would be worth the price her mother had paid with such quiet, dignity, and loneliness. Sometimes I forget he's always been like this, she said at last, her voice lower now, more honest than she intended. It was already arranged. Her voice trembled. My marriage to James. We met, and he didn't waste time. He courted me, made a point of being seen, of showing interest. He took me to meet his family. A weak laugh slipped out without humor. He's as wealthy as my father. The arrangement was perfect. But something changed. He became distant, cold. I felt it, but I didn't understand at the time. Until the day I saw Margot and him kissing. The next day, he wanted to change the arrangement, said he wanted to marry her. And my father agreed. A bitter smile appeared. There aren't many wealthy men around here. Otto showed interest soon after. Her expression hardened. That man is repulsive. And even so, my father agreed, and Margot is my half-sister. My mother died from heartbreak. She stopped. Just stopped. She didn't react, didn't get out of bed, didn't speak. Her breath faltered. One day, she just didn't wake up. Valen didn't move. And my father, she swallowed hard, didn't take long. He brought the other woman into the house, with her daughter, Margot. Leonora dragged a hand over her face, but the tears had already come. But her mother died too. She let out a frustrated laugh. Funny, isn't it? My father never stopped having other women. Never. But for Margot's mother, he tried. Called healers, spent money, did everything. For my mother, he did nothing. Leonora let out a quiet sob, no strength left to hold it back. I don't blame Margot, not even for James. She took a deep breath. I just want to be free. Valen said nothing. He only moved closer. When his arm wrapped around her shoulders, Leonora didn't resist. She leaned in. My father, she whispered against his chest, is to blame. Valen kept his gaze on the garden ahead, not on her, and said, That's exactly why you're buying your freedom. Silence settled between them. Leonora didn't answer right away. She stared ahead at the roots of the oak tree breaking through the ground without asking permission, as if that meant something she still couldn't put into words. Her eyes burned again. Thank you. It came out soft, almost lost. He pulled her closer, without warning. His hand came firm, drawing her against his chest. Leonora didn't have time to react. She just felt it. The warmth, the solidity, the way he didn't hesitate. Her face rested against his chest, and she breathed in deeply, as if she had finally found somewhere to fall, and he kissed her forehead. Leonora closed her eyes and didn't pull away. In the days that followed, the house filled with the restless movement of preparations. Fabrics arrived in the morning. Marta went up and down the stairs, carrying rolls of linen and folded silk under her arm. Joseph received visitors in his office, with a frequency Leonora recognized as that of a man consolidating his position. Using his daughter's marriage as a public declaration of alliance with the mysterious merchant, everyone wanted to know, and no one had been able to identify. Leonora let it happen. She handled the preparations with her usual efficiency, made the decisions that needed to be made, smiled when she had to. And inside, she kept noticing something that started small and grew with each passing night. Valen disappeared. Not during the day. During the day he was present, answering her father's questions with that calm that disarms any suspicion. But at night, when the house settled and the corridor torches were extinguished, she saw him heading toward the forest. When she saw him leave that night, Leonora told herself it wasn't her concern. After all, this was just an arrangement. But the next night, curiosity spoke louder. She stayed awake longer than she should have. The garden was empty. The small back door leading to the forest was slightly open. Where are you going, Valen? She waited. She stayed in the garden before he came out, hidden in the shadow of the oak trees, her cloak pulled over her shoulders, the night cold biting at her fingertips. She waited. The back door opened, Valen stepped out. She let him gain enough distance, then followed. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that he caught her scent in the garden the moment he stepped outside. His steps were fast. Leonora had to push herself to keep up, and even then, he pulled farther away with an ease that didn't match her effort. The forest began where the last torches of the estate ended. Leonora stepped into it. The darkness inside was different, thicker, more alive, filled with the sounds of the forest, leaves rustling above, something small running across the ground in the distance, the moon slicing through the branches in uneven bands of light that appeared and vanished as the wind moved the canopy. She lost sight of Valen. Where did he go? The moon called to him, with a pressure that began at the base of his chest and rose slowly like a tide. And his blood responded, before any conscious decision could be made. He had learned not to resist. Resistance only made the transformation more violent, and he didn't need violence. He needed the forest, the cold, the ground beneath his paws, and the air that, in that form, carried information the human body could never reach. He left his clothes folded at the base of the widest oak tree, a few steps ahead of where Leonora had stopped without knowing, and he shifted. It was fast, it always was, for him more than for any other in the pack, which said something about the blood he carried. An exhale, a surrender, and the form beneath the other emerged effortlessly. Large, dark, completely at ease in a forest that now recognized him as part of it. He ran. The pack was to the north. He felt them before he reached them. When he arrived at the clearing where they were gathered, the howls that rose were recognition, not alarm, and he answered in kind. He shared the thought. It was always like that among them, more direct than speech, more honest than anything language could form. The image of Leonora, the certainty that had grown in the past days without asking permission. The future queen. I will return to the castle soon. Prepare for her arrival. The beta remained still for a second, then inclined his head, not in surprise, but in acknowledgement of the weight of it. The silent acceptance of something that would change everything. The others howled, loud. Louder than Valen expected, and the sound rose through the trees and carried far. Too far, he realized when her scent grew closer. He broke away from the pack with a quick thought. Stay. And returned the way he had come, slower now, paws silent on the ground. Her scent growing stronger with every step until he felt her less than 20 paces away, still among the trees, her breathing short with fear. But she wasn't running. She heard the howls. The shift back was as fast as the first. An inhale, a decision. And he stood there, naked among the trees. His clothes lay at the base of the oak, a few steps ahead of where she stood, her back turned to him. He walked toward her exactly as he was. He stopped 2 steps away. Leonora turned suddenly, and when she saw him, the expression that crossed her face went through at least 4 things in less than a second. Shock, relief, confusion. And then, because she was Leonora, and Leonora processed things far too quickly for her own good, her eyes dropped, and snapped back up just as fast, fooling no one. She turned her back so quickly she nearly stumbled, one hand covering her eyes with a force almost comical in proportion to the gesture. Valen looked at her back, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel in that moment. A genuine urge to laugh. He stepped closer. Close enough that his voice reached her ear, low. Do you like what you see? She went completely still. The most handsome beggar that ever existed, the thought came uninvited, and she shoved it as deep as she could with the urgency of someone putting out a fire. I didn't see anything, she said, with a firmness that would have been convincing if her ear weren't completely flushed. Your heart is racing, he said, with a calm that was almost cruel. I can hear it. I can hear it. She processed that. "You can get dressed," she said, with all the composure she still had left. "Not yet." She turned slowly, with the caution of someone who wasn't sure what she would find but refused to admit it, and found him exactly as he was, his eyes on her with an attention that was anything but casual. She crossed her arms. Her face was composed. She was good at that, always had been. But there was a flush along her cheekbones that the moonlight made completely visible, and Valen didn't look away from it. "What are you doing here?" she said. "I would ask you the same." "I asked first." He looked at her, at the way she held herself upright, even with her hands slightly trembling. "I needed air," he said simply. "I come here when I need it." "In the middle of the night." "In the forest." "Yes." He looked at her, and then something changed in her expression. "Do you think you're handsome, Valen?" The question came calmly. He stayed quiet for a second. "Your eyes don't lie," he said. She stepped toward him, slowly. Close enough that he could feel her warmth in the cold night, close enough that her eyes were level with his mouth. She stayed there for a second that lasted far longer than a second, and then she stepped back. Turned to leave with the natural ease of someone who had simply finished a conversation. Valen watched her back. He let out a quiet laugh. "Trouble. You like to play with me." Then he took 2 quick steps, reached for her arm with a touch soft enough not to startle and firm enough not to be ignored, and when she turned, he was already too close for either of them to pretend it meant nothing. The kiss wasn't gentle. His hand on her jaw, his thumb resting lightly along her chin, and Leonora, who had spent her entire life keeping everything under control, lost all control. She didn't pull away. Her hands went to his chest, and that was when her body processed what her mind was still trying to catch up to. There was no fabric, only skin, warmed by exertion, by the contrast with the cold night, and by something else she couldn't name but felt in her palms like a current. The kiss deepened. When he pulled back slightly, it was only enough to speak, and his voice was different, lower. "You are mine," he said. Valen looked at her for a long moment. His hand was still on her jaw. His thumb moved slowly, tracing the line of her face with care. Leonora stayed still, her eyes fixed on his. He disarmed her completely. Not his intensity, not the physical presence that filled the space around them with an ease that should have been frightening and wasn't. It was the absence of demand. The way he stood there waiting for her to decide the next move, as if time were infinite and the choice entirely hers. Her hand rose to his face, her fingers settled along his jaw, and her thumb moved upward, slowly. It paused at his lips, slid there lightly, as if discovering something she shouldn't, but couldn't stop. He closed his eyes for a second. When he looked at her again, his eyes were different, almost yellow. Valen was holding his wolf side in check so she wouldn't notice, but she was breaking his control. A storm of thoughts crossed Leonora's mind. Who was he, really? Just a beggar, or something far beyond that? There were too many secrets in him. She was sure of it, but she didn't know if she was ready to hear them. And what if he had another family? No. She shut her eyes for a second, as if she could force the thought away. She hoped not. Damn it. He was far too beautiful to be simple, and that only made everything worse. What was he doing here in the forest, naked, as if that were natural? Had someone else been there before? Damn it, Leonora. Stop thinking about that. But she didn't stop. I'm in the middle of a forest at night with a naked man I barely know, and at the same time he feels like the person I've known the longest, and none of this makes any sense. Leonora. His voice came low. Yes, she said, and her own voice came out just as low, more honest than she intended. "Stop thinking." She almost laughed, still caught on that invisible thread between provocation and nerves. "I can hear it," he said. She lifted her gaze. "My heart?" "Your thoughts," he answered. But inside, Valen froze for a second. Damn. She's going to find out. He shouldn't be able to hear thoughts like that. Not outside the pack. But there, in that absolute silence of the forest, with just the two of them, and the air thick with her scent, something had shifted. The connection he felt with Leonora wasn't normal. It was too intense. And with her mind overflowing, each thought seemed to take shape in the space between them. It wasn't like with the pack. It wasn't control. It was instinct, proximity. It was her. And for one dangerous instant, he truly heard. Still, he pulled back within himself, suppressing it before it went too far, and when he spoke, he corrected himself before she could be sure of who he was. What he was. "I can't hear them, but I can guess from your expression." She didn't answer. She just kept looking at him. And it was that look that broke him. Something in him gave way. Valen didn't hold back anymore. His hand came firm, guiding her carefully, but leaving no room for escape. He brought her down to the forest floor, where her cloak spread open between them like a symbolic boundary neither of them truly intended to respect. The kiss returned, deeper, more intense. He felt when she tensed. And he stopped, stayed there, close, breathing with her, waiting, as if time belonged to her. And then she pulled him back. That was enough. From that point on, there was no restraint, only presence, only surrender, only that raw connection neither of them could explain. But that had been burning quietly between them since the first look. And that night, Valen knew, with a certainty he didn't even admit to himself, that he had never lived anything like that in his entire life. And Leonora gave herself to the unknown, not with fear, but with the courage of someone who had finally stopped resisting. They returned in silence, along the same path she had walked alone hours before, but something between them had changed. The next day, Margot went to the village market. The market of the neutral land stood at the center of the region, where merchants set up their stalls from dawn, and conversations blended with the scent of spices and cured leather. It was the place where news traveled before reaching homes, and Margot knew that better than most, because she had learned from her father that information was currency, and currency was power. She went to the inns. The first gave her nothing, the second neither. But at the third, an old man with calloused hands and a red nose from drinking too early recognized her before she even had to ask anything. "You're from Joseph's family, aren't you?" he said, in that tone of someone opening a door he knew held something behind it. Margot sat across from him. It took less time than she expected. The man had been at the fighting warehouse, not on the night Leonora met Valen, but on many before. And Valen was a known figure there for months, the man with tied hair who appeared when he needed coins and disappeared when he had enough to drink. "He's a beggar," the man said, with the simplicity of someone describing the weather. "Good in a fight, useless at everything else, and everyone here knows your sister is with him." Margot stayed silent for a moment. Then she smiled. "Thank you very much," she said, leaving a coin on the table before standing. She left the inn with the light step of someone who had just won a war no one else knew had begun. "I'll wait," she thought, as the market light hit her face. The best moment is in front of everyone. The wedding day arrived. That morning, Leonora was beautiful. It wasn't vanity. It was what Marta said when she finished arranging her hair. The white dress settled on her with the lightness only expensive fabric could carry. Her hair was styled, with a few loose strands framing her face. She walked downstairs. The hall was full. Family, Joseph's guests, merchants of the neutral lands who saw in that marriage a declaration of power worth witnessing. The murmur of voices lowered when she appeared at the entrance, and Leonora walked forward with her usual steady step, her eyes going straight to the end of the hall. Valen was there, standing, dressed in clothes better fitted than anything he had worn since arriving, and he hadn't taken his eyes off her from the moment she appeared. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before, or perhaps had seen but never named. It wasn't just desire. It was recognition. As if he had found exactly what he had been searching for. That look, she thought, taking the first step toward him. That look will be the end of me. She was halfway there when Margot stood. Margot's voice cut through the murmur of the hall with the precision of someone who had waited for the exact moment, when Leonora was at the center, with everyone watching. This wedding is a farce. Leonora stopped. This man, Margot said, satisfaction clear in her tone, is no merchant. He's a beggar. He fights in warehouses for coins. I don't know how he managed to get clothes and shoes to deceive this family, but I know what I saw and what I was told. You can ask anyone in the market, in the warehouses, in the inns. Everyone knows who he is. Joseph stepped forward. Is this true? His voice was low, more dangerous because of it. The entire hall went still. Every face turned toward Leonora. Some in genuine shock, others who had come because they already knew. Leonora stood there for a second that stretched too long. Then she lifted her chin. It's true, Leonora said, and her voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. The clarity of it cut through the entire room. And I did it because I'm tired of being treated like a bargaining piece. Tired of having my life decided by agreements I never chose. Her eyes went straight to her father. Steady. I won't marry a man you chose. I won't repeat my mother's mistake. The silence that followed was heavy. Joseph stepped forward, his gaze hard, sharp. Are you a fool? His voice came low, loaded with contempt. How did you plan to marry a beggar? How were you going to support yourself? Or did you think pride fills a plate? The impact of those words rippled through the hall, but Leonora didn't back down. If anything, she lifted her chin even higher. I don't need a man's name to sustain me. The anonymous merchant of the neutral lands has always been me. The business is mine. The money is mine. And from today on, my life is mine as well. Everyone in the hall was stunned, and Joseph went still. Not out of doubt. He believed it. Every word. He knew the daughter he had raised. Far too intelligent to say something she couldn't support. But belief wasn't the problem. Acceptance was. And in that moment, something inside him decided, if she wouldn't bend, he would take everything from her. His expression hardened. His hand came fast toward Leonora's face. You've forgotten your place. But before the blow landed, Valen caught his wrist midair. Valen had reached his limit. Don't you dare. Valen's voice came low. Lay a hand on my queen. The entire hall froze. Queen? Eyes shifted, confused, unsettled, trying to understand what they had just heard. Leonora blinked, her heart still racing. Queen? What is he talking about? Valen released Joseph's hand slowly, without hurry, as if there had never been any effort at all. Then he spoke. My name is Valen Aldrich, Alpha King of the Kingdom of Emberfell. The silence that fell was absolute. For a long time I have hidden as a beggar, he continued, his voice firm, filling the space without force. I have been studying the neutral lands for months. I have an interest in these lands. A pause. His eyes went to Leonora. A faint, almost intimate smile appeared. Until the day she appeared, with a proposal. He let out a quiet, low laugh, as if he still found it unbelievable. Leonora felt the impact of that like a silent blow. All this time, he had lied. Everything changed that day, Valen continued. I met her, and I knew. His eyes never left hers. He knew she was upset. But he also knew what he was doing. She is my future queen, my mate. The hall felt too small for the weight of those words. An extraordinary woman. His voice lowered. A shame her own father cannot see it. His gaze shifted, cold, sharp, and that an ungrateful sister would rather humiliate her in front of everyone, instead of being proud of her. Margot flushed red. Rage, shame, both at once. Joseph, in contrast, exploded. That cannot be true, his voice echoed through the hall. What would an Alpha King see in my daughter? Valen laughed. There was no humor in it. You are so small. You cannot see what you have. Leonora stood silent, her eyes wet, not from weakness, but from everything that meant. And deep inside, a question burned. How much of this had been real? Valen turned slightly. Bring the chest. The doors opened. 4 royal guards entered carrying a heavy oak chest. Behind them, the beta. The entire hall watched in absolute silence. The chest was placed on the floor. Valen stepped forward and opened it. Gold gleamed, flooding the room with light. I prepared this as a gift for the family, he said, with that unsettling calm. There was no anger, only truth. For the hospitality, for the dinner, for the chambers. Joseph stepped forward. However, the word fell like a blade. Joseph stopped. The woman I chose as my queen was treated as a bargaining piece since birth. She was humiliated. The chest closed. The sound echoed like a sentence. The gold returns to the castle. Joseph stared at the space where the chest had been a second before, with the expression of someone watching a fortune walk out the door, and for the first time in her life, Leonora saw her father without an argument. Forgive me, Your Majesty, Joseph said. I was caught off guard. I didn't know. It is not me you should ask forgiveness from, Valen said. His eyes went to Leonora. Kneel before your future queen, Valen said. Leonora watched her father kneel. Margot knelt soon after. Leonora looked at the scene for a moment. You don't have to... Her voice came firm. It doesn't matter what you do now. It changes nothing of what has been. And I don't need this to know who I am. She continued, her eyes moving to her father with an honesty that held no anger, only distance. Joseph looked up at her. There was something in his face then. Not exactly regret, because Joseph was not a man who regretted easily, but the late recognition of something he had underestimated his entire life. She turned to Valen. Why now? The question came out low, heavy with everything left unsaid. Why not before? Why a beggar? Why lie? The hall was still there, but Leonora spoke as if only the two of them existed. Valen did not look away. Because every king dreams of conquering the neutral lands, he said. He paused. I have been here for months. A beggar who earns coins fighting and spends them drinking raises no suspicion. He passes anywhere, sees everything. His eyes stayed on hers. And then you appeared, with that absurd proposal that night, in that warehouse. A faint smile. And I accepted the madness of a woman I didn't know, because something in me knew, before my reason agreed, that you were not what you seemed. Leonora stayed silent. I intended to tell you, he said. After the wedding, With the gold for your family, with everything settled. After the wedding, she repeated, and there was weight in the words. Your father is not a simple man. I knew that before I ever sat at his table. I did not trust him, and that distrust was enough to make me wait. Marriage first, truth after. Leonora looked at him with that gaze that carried its own weight. Calm on the surface, everything underneath. You should have told me. Valen stayed quiet for a second. I admit, I was afraid. She blinked. Yes, he said, with an honesty that seemed to cost him. I am a king afraid of you. Your gaze alone breaks every barrier I've built. Your gaze alone undoes me. A pause. Binding you to me before telling the truth, in a way that you wouldn't be able to walk away, seemed more strategic. Leonora stayed serious for 2 seconds, and then she couldn't hold it. A laugh escaped before she could stop it. Real, low, entirely hers. I would have done the same, she said. Valen smiled slowly. You would have done worse than me. Much worse, she agreed, without hesitation. He laughed, and she laughed with him. And in that moment, between a king's confession and a woman's understanding, the weight of the entire hall seemed to lift just a little. I should have told you sooner, he admitted, and his voice lost all armor. You're right about that. I should have told you. He stepped closer, and then he knelt. The Alpha King of Emberfell. On his knees, in the middle of the hall. Leonora. His voice was different. No performance, only truth. I have never met anyone like you. In my entire life, across all the kingdoms I have crossed, all the men and women I have judged and been judged by. Never. He lifted his gaze to her. You are the most intelligent person I have ever met, and the strongest. Not the kind of strength that shouts, the kind that stays quiet and solves things. Leonora held her breath. I love you. The silence lasted a full second. A tear slipped down her face before she could stop it. Don't play with me, she said, her voice small. I love you, he repeated without hesitation. I give you everything I have. Everything. My lands, my kingdom, my pack, my name. I want you. His eyes held hers. Will you be my queen, my mate? Leonora looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. And then she smiled. Yes. He rose slowly, took her hand, and brought it to his lips. And when their eyes met again, she said, with that direct lightness that was uniquely hers, But I don't want to marry here now, in the middle of this scandal. He laughed, low, real, the first completely unguarded laugh she had heard from him. Then we'll marry in our kingdom. A few weeks later, Emberfell welcomed its queen. The wedding took place under the open sky of his kingdom, among ancient stone and banners in the wind, with the pack gathered and the people filling the streets. And that night, Valen marked her in the mating ritual. Months later, Leonora discovered she was expecting a child, the first heir of Emberfell, the child of an Alpha King and a human who never needed claws to conquer what she wanted, because it was Leonora who ultimately conquered the neutral lands, not with armies, not with blood. She returned to that territory as the woman she had always been, only now with a name, with a story, and with the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders that respected her as it respected its king. She negotiated, mediated, built bridges where there had only been rivalry, and where other kings had tried to dominate by force and failed. She sat at the table and walked away with agreements that lasted generations. The merchants of the neutral lands recognized her first, then the Alphas, then the neighboring kingdoms, who sent their envoys not to speak with Valen, but with her, a human, without magic, without fangs, without claws, Only intelligence. Only courage. Only that rare gift that cannot be taught. The ability to make the world trust. And in the neutral lands, the echo of that story did not fade as quickly as Joseph had imagined. The man who had once been feared began to watch his agreements slip through his fingers, one by one, as his influence diminished in the face of new times that no longer obeyed him. Margot, on the other hand, remained at James's side, living exactly the life she had always wanted. Comfortable, predictable, and quietly distant from any real greatness. And without them ever knowing, it was Leonora who made sure they never lacked what they needed. Through intermediaries, discreet dealings, and unseen favors, she took care of the family that had once cast her aside, not out of obligation, but because, in the end, she remained who she had always been. Only now, powerful enough to choose. And that is how Leonora, the daughter a father once treated as a bargaining piece, became the woman for whom an Alpha King gave up his disguise, his pride, and all his plans, and in return gained something no kingdom alone could offer. A queen no throne had ever deserved more,